there aren't many people today who can practice something that has been practiced in that way on that land for thousands of generations. I think that's really unique. I'm I say 13th generation. It goes back way before European contact in my family and in most Wabanaki families. There was a period of time, I guess, if you grow up in a family that does something, generally it becomes sort of like commonplace and there's not always a whole lot of interest in it. I grew up surrounded by baskets, surrounded by basket makers, and never really thought about actually doing it. It was just one of those things that everyone did. As I sort of grew and watched this art form grow, there were a whole lot of people that were learning fancy basket making, which is the more artistic branch of basketry in Wabanaki culture. But there weren't a whole lot of people picking up the tradition of utility baskets, which are sort of like, that's the sort of like functional form of the art form, which was like creating things, containers for people to use, and pack baskets, laundry baskets, scale baskets. And I think initially I got into doing it just as a sort of like responsibility, like somebody from my generation has to pick that up in a way. So yeah, I initially went to live with my grandfather when he was diagnosed with emphysema. And there was this sort of end point of the ability to learn, because he was sort of like, in our community, one of the few utility basket makers. I spent 2 years living with him, and yeah, he taught me in the old way of teaching, which is like, the ash is downstairs, go make a basket. And then you go and you do it, and nope, that's not right. And then you go and do it again, and yep, that's right. So, and it's sort of this like trial and error. And I think that's sort of like, it's not a strictly indigenous way of teaching, but it allows lessons to be embedded deeper, I think. If you're just shown how to do something, and it's done for you, and then you sort of like, you learn it, and over time you get that sort of like functionality about it. But if you sort of like learn by fumbling, you learn how it's best for you to do it. If that makes sense. You're not just repeating somebody else's form of something. And that's always something that he had said when he was teaching me, was he can show me how to make a basket, but I have to learn how I make a basket. I can't verbalize what the indigenous knowledge is, but it's something that's a muscle memory. It's like the very first time I made a basket, just at touching the ash and working with it, my hands automatically knew what to do. It was like experiencing cellular memory. Like, wow, there's something that's inherent within this material that resonates very strongly with who I am as a person. I developed the way that I do it over a long period of time. It's like, it is that sort of interesting thing when you go back and see something that you created even a couple of years ago. You're like, oh my God, I sold that? Which is like, at the time, I even remember like being like, man, that is awesome. That is like top notch. And then you go back and you're like, oh my God, this looks like a 12th grader did it. So, yeah, it was a very slow process. even if I wind up burning the basket because I never want anybody to see it, there's something that comes out of it. Some aspect that I can then go, that was not right for anything ever. But this part of it makes sense on this. I think that's where sort of like that evolution of form lies. I think about the use first, and then that often creates really interesting sculptures. Like if you think about, one of the traditional baskets that I think everyone is familiar with is the pack basket, right? It's ubiquitous with the Maine North Woods. This form is a product of its function. So it was originally designed to fit on our back, so it was literally a pack basket. But then this sort of bulbous front was designed to fit in the hull of a canoe. So it's like, this is like before European contact, our roads were the rivers. So every Wabanaki family, and most indigenous families, had a canoe. And how would you get from point A to point B? And how would you carry your stuff there? So that's what this shape represents. And the fact that it carried through for generations and generations and generations shows that sort of like that marriage between function and form. And so over time, that sort of just, you find something that like, and then again, so what I've done with these is like, no one's going to carry a giant pack basket on a subway, right? It's bulky. And most people have found efficient ways to carry their things, but you still need to carry things. And so this is like designed for today's utility, which is, it's less cumbersome and it's less, you don't need to carry all of your traps and, to get your food and everything. You need to carry your wallet so you can hunt and gather. So that's sort of like, it's still the same function, but the form has changed. But it's not changed all that much. I still process the tree the way that generations of Wabanaki before me have done. I then process it a little bit further to then refine these materials so that you can create these more delicate things. But this material is just as strong and as versatile as when they were making them so that you could put a dead animal in it. I think one of the things that this past year has shown me is like how stressful going from show to show to show is. And, my girls are at a very sort of like magical age right now. And you really only have so much time before they're like, I want to talk to you. So, yeah. They still want hugs now, so it's great. I try to provide as much opportunity for them to see it and feel the ash and touch it and work with it. It's one of those things where, not to go all dark, but I will probably be or my daughter will probably be the first generation in a millennia that won't be able to pass the tradition on to their kids because of the emerald ash borer. So I want her to understand it and to, practice, but I don't want to I think when parents put this pressure on their kids to, carry on something, it's like, just to know that it's part of her tradition and the importance of it, I think. And then whether they carry that on or not is up to them. I have a hard time emotionally thinking about it because it's so immense, and we've been sitting here in traditional Wabanaki territory watching this tidal wave just wash across Indian country and devastate ash populations across the country. And so it's hard for me to have an optimistic view. There are people who do have an optimistic view and are like, there's solutions, and, there are people that are inoculating seed source trees and looking to the future. And I think that that's great. And I want to get there. I do want to get there. I'm just not there yet. The whole entire process is literally disintegrating the way that it was integrated in nature. Does that make sense? So, and that is essentially like what traditional indigenous ecological knowledge is like figuring out how to create the strongest, best thing in concert with nature, not forcing something to do what you want it to do, right? And that's part of that whole sort of like conversation we have with the environment is like it's not like bending nature to your will, it's finding a way to work with nature to create something. Because like baskets, it's essentially the same fibers that make the tree strong make the basket strong. We're just rearranging them. During the sort of like rusticator era, when Wabanaki were coming into contact with these like sort of European socialites that were looking for something fanciful and like, you know, creative, they met that desire through the market. And so you see these baskets that are like strawberries and just these really whimsical creations that were designed to meet a market need at the time. And it is the sort of like expression of like sense of humor, just like really, really interesting things. And I think that is sort of like, you know, we have this thing in the American imagination of like the stoic Indian, but there were really, really creative people, I think, in every generation. And it wasn't just the sort of like, you know, hand to mouth sort of thing. There were like really creative, funny artists who were doing really interesting things. I think this is sort of like if people find something that they want to do, the fear is always like, where do I start, or how do I start? You just start. You just do it. That's really like, and then everything else falls into line, I think. And that's sort of the case with like, with anything, especially with creativity. Like, if you love it, then it'll just sort of like figure itself out. I mean, maybe that's naive, but that's what I think.